are Paper Mario, truly a beloved series. It's home to many cherished games that have since been regarded as some of the best in the franchise.
Wait just a minute. Haven't we been here before? Why yes we have. The Paper Mario series is one that I have covered once before. But while that video took a look at its most recent installment, focusing more on the this and that rather than that and this, today we'll be going back to where the series all began. That's right, in this installment of the long-awaited Phun's analysis, we'll be taking a look at the original Paper Mario. Ha! Guess again, nerds! You didn't think we'd be entertaining the thought of that malign, monstrous mustachioed man for a millisecond, did you? Hell no! I've got better plans. In 2019, a little indie darling released by the name of Bug Fables. Developed by Moonsprout Games and composed by the incredibly talented Tristan Ulrich, this game takes inspiration from Paper Mario games of old, no, this nonsense, don't worry. It does so in a way that lets its mechanics shine far brighter than even those originals in some aspects. In fact, you may have noticed me streaming the game on this channel last year, and it's safe to say that we had a blast. So, how did it do? What did Bug Fables get right, and what makes it such a gosh diddly darn pleasure to play through not once, but twice? Well, without further ado, let's just get into it already. Welcome to Phun's analysis of Bug Fables, the Everlasting Sapling. Before we get into what makes Bug Fables good, though, we need to take a look at what made the original Paper Mario games so beloved to this day. What do I mean by the originals, though? It's a pretty vague term to use. Well, I'm not talking about the newer games, namely Sticker Star, Color Splash, and most recently, Origami King. They're still RPGs, technically. Well, that's debatable, but they take a lot away from the older games, and let's be honest, they're not really as good. Super Paper Mario was an alright game, but it's also a 2D, 3D flipping platformer with scarce RPG elements sprinkled throughout, so not really what we're looking for, and most certainly not related to Bug Fables. No, what we're looking at are the first two games, Paper Mario 64 and The Thousand Year Door. The two games are fairly similar and interchangeable for our purposes, but just so my false promise from a few minutes ago isn't completely empty, let's take a look at 64, the first game. While seeming a bit more stripped down than its universally loved and personally preferred sequel, 64 does a pretty good job of laying down the fundamentals of what we'll be analysing in an old bug game over there. No battle audience or cell-ish moves or anything like that, they're not relevant. Just the core battle system in its simplest form. Let's quickly go over the basics, shall we? Mario can use a base jump or hammer attack to attack enemies. Jumps can hit airborne enemies that the hammer can't reach, and hammers can hit spiked enemies that the jump cannot. Mario also has many different partners who can act on the same turn, with their own unique abilities, advantages and disadvantages. But I don't feel like going over every single one, so just know that they're there. On their turn, Mario and Co can also use more powerful special moves at the cost of flower points, FP. When FP runs out, you can no longer use them. When it's the enemy's turn, Mario can block the attack with a hearty A press and some good timing, reducing the damage he takes. Mario loses heart points when receiving damage, and when HP reaches 0, he's toast. You can also find badges across the game that will commend your abilities in battle. The amount of badges you can have equipped depends on how much FP you have. BP, badge points. Some of these badges can also boost your HP, or FP, or TP. Wait, there's no TP in this game. You know what? Forget it. That'll do for an explanation. Hopefully. It'll all explain itself later. Trust me. There's a lot more I could go over. For the sake of brevity, I'll omit the details for now and bring them up when they're relevant. But the battle system is the most important for our purposes. The game is absolutely brimming with charm, of course, which is basically a given for most of Mario's RPGs, but I digress. So yeah, it's Mario. It's pretty neat. Now the next thing is Wait, what was this video about again? Oh yeah! Bug Fables. Bug Fables, Bug Fables, Bug Fables. Let it be no secret, I absolutely adore this game. I might even go so far as to say it is in my top 247 favourite games I played last year. A privilege indeed. And while my first blind playthrough was very fun, it was on my second playthrough for this video that I truly started to appreciate the game and what it does. Of course, it takes heavy inspiration from Paper Mario, but I think it goes a lot deeper than that. At its core, what I believe makes Bug Fables so enjoyable is its battle system, writing, level design, and world building, and how they all weave in and out of each other in such interesting ways. That and I like Paper Mario. So, let's get into this, shall we? The premise of Bug Fables goes as follows. I'm not really spoiling anything here as this is all explained in like the first minute of gameplay. So, there's this kingdom called Bulgaria. As the name implies, it is home to many species of bugs, who can all talk and think freely and whatnot. It's sort of like Hollow Knight in a way, except not really, not at all, not even in the slightest. These games have practically nothing in common besides being bug games. There exists a little kingdom of ants, and the Ant Queen, their leader, has a dream. To find the everlasting the everlasting sapling. A fabled treasure, of which eating just one of its leaves would turn you basically immortal. Unfortunately, the thing's pretty darn hard to find, and she must entrust the mission to her daughter before falling into a hard-earned sleep. And so, the new queen, who I suppose couldn't be asked to do it herself, sets up the Explorers Association. Filled with bugs of all different shapes and sizes, they all share one goal: to find that sapling and earn a fortune. So it's basically like the world's most expansive, dangerous, and just plain absurd treasure hunt. Now, I'm not saying any more, you little rascal. Go play for yourself. It's good. In Bug Fables, you play as Carbo the Beetle and V the Bee, two new explorers with little recognition, yet they somehow achieve all of what the other, more experienced explorers couldn't in about 5 minutes. Along their travels, they also meet Leaf, a moth with ice powers and generally considered a pretty cool dude. And so, the tale of the 3 musketeers you'll be playing as commences, with each proving to be a valuable member of the team. So, why don't we see how Team Snakemouth, that's their team name by the way, fares in battle. Now, this is the reason why I went over the Paper Mario battle system earlier. This game's one is quite similar, but it's better, and I'll show you why. While it still retains a lot of elements such as skills and blocking, there are plenty of differences. Firstly, while Paper Mario just had Mario and a chosen partner, here we have 3 members active at once. Carbo and Leaf, with just their regular attacks, can only hit grounded enemies. If one is airborne, Bee must use her trusty boomerang, yes, actually called that, to knock him down. Other enemies, meanwhile, may have high defences, and Carbo must use his piercing horn to make them vulnerable for the others to attack. To complement this, the team can switch the formation in which they attack, with the one up front gaining an attack boost at the cost of being targeted more often by enemies. You can also change which turn goes first without changing the team's formation, and finally, you can use Turn Relay. Turn Relay, as the name implies, allows a team member to give their turn to another, but to balance this, each member will gradually become more exhausted the more times this is used, and their attack will lower. That sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but trust me, once you get used to it, Bug Fables' battle system is one about planning ahead and strategy. A lot of the time, you'll find yourself considering whether your combined attack power is enough to finish off an enemy, whether it needs to be made vulnerable by a specific member, and whether or not to use skills to speed up the battle or save your TP for later. TP being this game's equivalent of FP, by the way. This level of depth and nuance gives it a level of replayability that a lot of the more quote-unquote traditional RPGs tend to lack. This game also uses medals as basically a badge stand-in. Just like their papery equivalent, these alter your abilities, mostly in battles, at the cost of MP, medal points, adding yet another layer to the whole thing. And this is relevant to Paper Mario 2, just thought I'd mention. Defeating enough enemies and earning enough XP grants you a tasty level up, and just like Paper Mario, it gives you the choice of more HP, TP or MP. Since level ups don't boost attack or defense on their own, this means that grinding is not nearly as much of an issue. Good! I hate grinding! This is honestly a great compromise between having a full-on level up system with all manner of stat boosts, but running the risk of grinding becoming an issue, and just removing XP altogether. This game also has a plethora of bosses that really put your strategic skills, TP usage and block timing to the test, and overall they're pretty solid. But if you really want to show off, there's plenty of optional bosses to face, complete with HP values deemed illegal in dozens of countries. It's good! I can say with confidence that it's honestly one of the best battle systems I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Anyway, I think I've rambled long enough on that, and it's just one piece of what makes Bug Fables so bloomin' brilliant. Firstly, let's take a brief moment to talk writing. Contrary to Paper Mario, this game doesn't really have any silent protagonists, and it can't. Not really. The game does such a good job at characterising its three main characters that it's honestly quite surprising. Kabu being mostly the straight man of the trio, typically looking out for the others and valuing his newfound friends. V being the most expressive, appearing selfish and greedy but ultimately well-meaning, and Leaf as the overly sarcastic bum but appreciating V and Kabu all the same. Considering these characters are together for about 95% of the game, it's important for them to all play off of each other well, and thankfully, Moonsprout succeeded. Like, there's this ongoing joke about V asking for rewards from NPCs for doing their quests, and Kabu being all helping as its own reward and such. It's a bit overdone, honestly, because it's in like every side quest, but it does serve a purpose, as there are a couple times V breaks from this characterization because, you know, she's not heartless. It's not just these three, of course. The two fellow explorers of popular e-girl Mathiva and #1 fan Zasp, act as a sort of rival team towards Team Snakemouth. You see, unlike V, Mathiva has absolutely no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Zasp is actually pretty cool. He's just way too obsessed with Mathiva and would literally die for her. He'd donate 3,000 berries just to breathe the same air as her, which is a little pathetic as trees do that for free. Anyway, there are many more recurring characters who all serve a very important purpose, yet I can't be bothered naming them all as we'd be here forever. But of course, in their plight to find the everlasting sapling, surely they must travel across all sorts of stunning locales. Yes. And buckle up, because I actually have some pretty interesting things to say. So you play as bugs, right? Can we agree on that? And I personally believe that the game uses this bug-sized perspective greatly to its benefit. But why should I do all the talking? Why don't we have a look? Up? There. So as you can see, as bugs, everything around you is very, very big. This really lends itself well to the setting and areas and... Shut up! And contributes to the game's world building very well. Look! Over yonder! The buildings of the Ant Kingdom are all made of cardboard boxes. Over there! This whole lake is formed by an open water pipe that doesn't run out somehow. The area is going to be flooded in a week and literally no one cares. And in the lake, there's one area built out of a car's tyre, and another built out of the hubcap of that very same tyre. And while I'm not sure how a tyre exactly got back here in the first place, it sure is really neat. And, ooh, down here! The entire desert region is all just a children's sandbox, complete with those little kiddie spades and... It's good! It's commendable how Bug Fables takes advantage of its given setting to create something truly unique. And it's not just areas. This game is simply brimming with references to real-life entomology. Now, I'm no dirt-foraging bug expert, or to use the more polite term, a filthy bugger. But off the top of my head, Ants are notoriously hard workers, who not only built the Ant Queen's Anthill Palace, but also responsible for the network of tunnels spreading all across Bulgaria. The bees, meanwhile, produce honey for all the other kingdoms, albeit autonomously, and they all live in this beehive way up a tree. Most of the main kingdoms use a colony system just like in real life, each usually having a queen to rule over them all, but due to the bee's nature, the bee queen in particular had like 100 children consisting of their kingdom, what, how. Finally, no matter which timeline we live in, wasps will always be complete and utter arseholes. World record, baby! That's a world record! There's more I could talk about regarding this, but for spoilers' sake I'll refrain. It's pretty cool though. Now, next up is... It's time for a pop quiz. Fingers on buzzers. Which of these 3 topics will Phun talk about next? Is it A. Level design, B. Music, or C. A comprehensive history of salt and vinegar crisps? If you guessed A... no. Obviously the correct answer is B, you twat. Back to you in the studio, Phun. Now, you see, the first crisps were invented in... Oh, whoops, wrong script. The music. It's really good. The composer of Bug Fables, Alvik, and for the love of Venus, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, did a fantastic job at making each theme feel unique and all of good quality. Leitmotifs are used greatly to the game's benefit too, with bits of one song being used in another for thematically relevant purposes, like the main quote-unquote theme of Bug Fables being used in a bunch of places. So yeah, very good. Now, to sort of maybe try and wrap this video up sometime this week, we're going to analyse an area fairly early in the game that puts this all together, filled with many interactions to help set up the game's main characters, a good introduction to the game's battle mechanics as they are gradually introduced, and some decent level design thrown in just for good measure. This is Snakemouth Den. Firstly, a wee bit of context. Bee and Kabu have formed a somewhat dysfunctional exploration team and are setting off towards their first mission, to explore Snakemouth Den and hopefully retrieve the artifact that resides there. What's Snakemouth Den, you ask? Oh, only the most dangerous and insane of trips, filled with traps and unspeakable horrors, where no explorer to ever set foot in its winding cavern has ever come back out alive. But that's just a bug fable, isn't it? You're way overhyping the first dungeon in the game, but sure, let's play along. And with that, the 2 are off. The tutorial path there is pretty straightforward, and soon enough they make it inside. First impressions are a little underwhelming. This really doesn't live up to the hype, you know. Regardless, they soon find the artifact they were looking for, the everlasting fungus. That was pretty easy, and honestly a little disappointing. What? Who? What is... This encounter with the ferocious Spider Spooder is important. It shows us not only that V is not yet fully devoted to protecting her teammate, hence her sort of just running off. But it also serves as a tutorial that Kabu cannot hit airborne targets without V's help. Ooh, clever. There's also this moth dude trapped in Spooder's web, which they're planning to break, free him, and get out of there. The moth dude turns out to be Leaf, the 3rd member of your team. And I'm really sorry, but I'm going to talk about boring game design again. It's important to note that the game lets you grow accustomed to using V and Kabu earlier on, as to not make it too overwhelming when Leaf joins as the 3rd team member. But given that the 3rd member is what really helps give the battle system its nuance, battles with just 2 could grow stale otherwise. So what I'm basically saying is that Leaf is introduced at the perfect time. It then also has a good share of the old gimmicks to spice up rooms, with Leaf freezing droplets, Kabu moving the ice cubes, and V to hit faraway switches. All members each get their own time to shine with their own abilities. The enemies further support this, having high defense for Kabu, airborne guys to knock down with V, and the fungal enemies' weakness to Leaf's ice. It is, all in all, a great area to not only teach you the basics of how the game will work later on, but to keep you invested with some good puzzles and the character growth demonstrated by the team. Top it off with a thrilling boss fight against Spooder, serving as both a great climax for the chapter and a way to signify the team's growth by beating the previously unbeatable creature. The three of them then retrieve the artifact and voluntarily leave Snakemouth Den. They survive, don't worry. Right, I think that's everything. Well, almost. There is one last aspect I'd like to discuss, but it does heavily feature some endgame spoilers. I'll probably never get the opportunity to discuss this again, but I must emphasise, do not proceed unless you have beaten the game for yourself, or watched a Let's Play, or whatever. It's the kind of bit that you really shouldn't have spoiled for yourself, so if that doesn't sound very welcoming, please close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears, and shout la 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 for the next several minutes. Alternatively, use this timestamp to skip ahead. You gone? I sure hope so. Now then, I'm sure the informed audience still watching this bit knows all too well what I'm going to discuss. So let's cut right to the chase and discuss, well, what's the deal with the Giant's Lair, exactly? An area which is seldom mentioned until the beginning of Chapter 6, theorized to be the location of the everlasting sapling and thus your ultimate goal. Tension builds across the chapter as the big bad Wasp King tries to get his grubby little mitts on the thing by venturing to the Giant's Lair himself, as the newly found owner of the plot MacGuffins required to access the sapling. Naturally, Team Snakemouth and the others must endeavour to stop the Wasp King, else Bulgaria be ruled by the Wasp Kingdom and served complimentary stew forevermore. A fate worse than death, as you can imagine. The area in question, also sometimes referred to as the Dead Land, No Bugs Land, or quite simply Don't Come Here You'll Die, is reacted to quite strongly when it's revealed to be their final destination. Even V, who moments later reveals she doesn't even know the Termite Kingdom exists, knows of the place and regards it to be haunted. The Queen further elaborates on this, stating that no bug who has ventured in there has ever returned. But it can't be that bad, right? After all, we just made it through the swamplands. Nothing could possibly be as bad as that, right? And the only known entrance via the rubber prison is completely barred off. Rather poorly, but there was an effort. Before we actually enter though, let's address the literal elephant in the garden. Giant's Lair is a house. You can see it quite clearly from the telescope in the bee's hive. It is said to have once been home to some of the so-called giants, or humans as we know them. As discussed earlier, this game uses its bug-sized perspective to its advantage, with originally man-made objects like a sandbox or a tire being repurposed in a new context for the bugs. Put simply, you play as bugs. We, as humans living in the real world, know what these things are used for, but they don't. They see it as a vast desert overgrown with cacti, or some weird rubbery thing that you might as well make a prison out of. And that's what makes the premise of Giant's Lair so interesting. The game utilises this perspective to turn what was once a completely ordinary house into this impossibly huge behemoth. Even in game, you only explore one room of it, the kitchen, first travelling across the floor, then climbing up a fridge, before eventually making your way across a stovetop, and finally a table as the location of the sapling. And that alone is plenty for the events of Chapter 7. So, that's it, then. The Giant's Lair is interesting because of its setting as a house and how the bugs reverse it. Pack your bags, jobs are good, and let's go home. But wait! We aren't done just yet. Do you remember how V said this place was haunted? Well... To make one thing clear, you're not alone here. Far from it. Turns out, the reason why bugs don't go into the lair is because it is home to these things. Deadlanders, as I'll be calling them. They're not even considered bugs by the characters in the game. They have no signs of intelligence or higher thought like the folks in Bulgaria, and are generally quite disturbing. I believe what makes them a little hard to look at is just how indescribable their appearances are. They're seemingly mutated beyond any form of recognition for whatever bugs they once were. Not to mention, they're incredibly strong. By far the strongest regular enemies in the game, and even the enemies from the previous chapter can hardly compare. The game will utterly tell you that running away is a viable option. Should you instead choose to fight them head on like I did, get ready for a world of high damage and high HP. One of the smaller details in this area, which goes unspoken but I think is really fascinating, when you first see the Wasp King entering the lair, he is accompanied by a few of his Wasp troopers. Then, throughout the lower section, you might just notice these spears littering the floor. And when you do eventually meet up with the king again, he's all alone. Those guys died on the way there. They're dead. Despite the Wasp Kingdom being shown as the primary antagonists across the game, they are not at all affiliated with the Deadlanders, and they are more than happy to attack the Wasp King and his troops, further showing just how feral they are. Oh, but just a quick tangent. When I was streaming my playthrough of this game and got to the Giant's Lair, I quickly noticed these guys don't really have names. They're just called Alpha, Beta, Gamma, which is kind of boring. Now it makes sense from a world-building perspective, as the Deadlanders have scarcely been documented due to their strength, but we in the stream saw it as the perfect opportunity to give them silly nicknames. This one's Freak Spider, even if it looks a bit more like a crab. This one I thought looked a bit like Siren Head, except its head and hands are sirens, so naturally we called it Siren. And this one? Jeremy. Oh yeah, and there's also this guy. Throughout the lair's first section, you are stalked by this fine fellow. And it sort of just toys with you by dropping freak spiders on you if you're spotted by it. You are not told what it is. Nobody knows, both in-universe and in the fandom. Its body is completely shrouded in darkness save for a couple skeleton talon-like appendages and its giant cat-like glowing eye. That's all we know because of how little we're told about the lands outside of Bulgaria. And honestly, I think that's the main reason why the Giant's Lair is so disturbing. If you go out of your way to collect the several lore books scattered across Bulgaria, you'll learn not much, honestly. Mostly just speculation because, well, they've no way of knowing, really. It's made quite clear in this chapter that Bug Fables, you know, wacky bee with an attitude, sentient honey with a face out to kill you, and e-girl simp Bug Fables, is in one form or another post-apocalyptic. There are no humans around, these things exist, and the lore books hint at something happening, with mentions of fire raining from the sky. And while it is fun to speculate, in a weird way, I'm actually thankful we don't have all the answers. It all helps make the Deadlands feel far more unknowable and intangible than Freddy Fazbear's Wacky Workbench or whatever horror games are popular these days. Sometimes fear truly lies in the unknown. So we're nearly done here, but before I wrap things up, just a few smaller things I wanted to shed some light on that complement the area's atmosphere. Firstly, the music. That is, if you can even call it that. The main theme of Giant's Lair consists of long, droning noises with scattered notes here and there. But why let me do all the talking? Have a little listen for yourself. Lovely, right? So nice to listen to. But when you're spotted by Clifford over here, the music turns frantic, almost as if to imitate the crawling of a freak spider that's definitely chasing you by now. Also, a more minor detail, but I really like the reddish fog effect surrounding the place. Have you ever gone to the Nether in Minecraft? It's a bit like that. It further helps complement the unfamiliarity and unease of exploring the area. A bit like me exploring a new dimension, just in a more figurative way. Now, one last thing to point out. This crystal. This thing caused me immeasurable grief during my blind stream of this area. Wanna know why? Well, at this point in the section, I was rather weary from all the Deadlander encounters. There was an encounter with both a Jeremy and Siren in the way, and I certainly didn't have the strength left to take them on. That's when I turned my attention to the strange crystal nearby. Unlike every other crystal in the game, which has been consistently either blue or yellow, this one is a bright, ominous red. Rewind to earlier in this section, where I found a so-called mystery berry lying around. With a rather dubious description, this thing will either heal or harm you for 8 HP upon consumption. Fitting for such an outlandish and almost alien area. So while it was in my best hopes that this crystal would heal me back up, could I really be sure? What if it was somehow corrupted and would harm me instead? But I had to take the risk. There was no way I'd get through otherwise. So, I hit it, and to my relief, it healed me to full. It just didn't save my game is all. Luckily, that crystal was not any form of trap whatsoever. Oh, sweet Jesus, get out of there! Yeah, it's kind of a bait and switch, and I am all for it. This moment really stuck with me. Partially because I spent around 10 minutes trying to finagle my way around this Jeremy without having to fight it, but that's irrelevant. That's about all I have to say regarding this area, except for this really finicky ice puzzle that I hate, but the rest is good enough, so I'll let it slide. From there you fight a climactic final battle against the Wasp King, serving as a great final test of everything you've learned with battles across the game. Plot twist, plot twist, plot twist, and that's a bug game. GG. Spoilery bit over. So, when all is said and done, what do I make of this game? Well, to conclude, Bug Fables is a brilliant game, filled with charm, a cohesive world, and an engaging battle system. If you like Paper Mario, go play Bug Fables. If you like RPGs in general, go play Bug Fables. If you like neither of those things, what are you doing here? Just go play Bug Fables anyway, you'll thank me later. I believe Moonsprout overall did a very, very good job, and I'm eager to see where they're headed next. After all, I think we all need something to do while waiting for Silksong. Thank you, and good night.
Let's walk. That honey drop goes for 4 berries. Does it look any good to you?